Okay guys, quick video. I'll try to make it quick, covering the next task for Magma, which is task 5, which really isn't that different from any of the previous tasks you've been doing other than, well, particularly in 3 and 4 where you're able to use any size and any weight, and then you were employing lines or blocks. You could, if you had some, multiple explorations on some of these, bring 1 or 2 of them into task 5 to consider using. But again, if you do that, then do more comps. So if you bring in 2 examples from previous tasks, don't do 3, do, like I said, 3 to 5, so do more closer to 4 or 5. So that's, you have an option there. And essentially you're going to be doing the any size and any weight, and you're just applying color, okay? And how you apply color is really up to you. There are different ways to do it, and I'll show you some examples. For the sake of time, I'll also show you some examples of experimental. Won't get too deeply into talking about those, but I'll show you examples because experimental was pretty broad. Experimental means different things to different people, and how far you push it is up to you. I'll show you some examples that have been done before so you can get somewhat of an idea. But we'll focus on task 5 in terms of any technical questions, applying color and that kind of thing. So let's jump right into the examples. I'll show you here a few. And again, how you use color is up to you. You can use multiple colors. You can use, as this person did, one color. And one color design is often a beautiful thing. One color is often based on a budget limitation, so being able to work with one color is a skill you should consider having. Typically you'll see a color black plus a color used a lot in design, but you can do a lot with one color. And here's someone that did a pretty basic layout. There are things that could be refined. There's an intentional slice here that they did not bleed. They did not intend for it to bleed, so they wanted to slice it and keep it floating there. These blocks of text could be brought up a little closer to each other. This looks like too much space between these, so you don't want these to become islands like we talked about. You want them to be more unified than they are right now. Type is intentionally small and not default line spacing, but tight-ish. That's okay. That could work well. There are things here that I would have a space added between the dash and the A. I would go in here and add some space between the parentheses and the 2. And again, you have some baseline shift issues there, as you can see. But minor things that could be added to make it really refined. Okay. But again, one color is oftentimes just fine. Opposite of that here is we're looking at essentially 4 colors. Okay, this person worked with the idea of cyan for this blue, magenta, yellow, and then black, which is basically the CMYK color model, which was a little nod to that. And more of a vibrant layout. They used transparency as well, which you can do in Illustrator. You could also do it easily in InDesign. And I'll show you how to do that if you have any questions. Again, InDesign and Illustrator are similar in some ways. When it comes to type, there are just a few different steps you got to take, so we'll talk about that. The type is spaced nicely, it's sized nicely, it's organized in the page well. Obviously, they created this as the central element and then worked the rest of the information around that for the composition. Good sizes and spacing, like I said, and well-crafted type. A little bit of space could be added, like we talked about on the last one here, but generally a nice job. 2-color example here, and we say 2 color, you're going to say, well, there's white also. That's 3 colors, right? No, it's 2 colors. If you consider the situation, if this is a printed item and it's printed on white, then that'd be the color of the paper or whatever it is printed on, and then black and red are applied. Okay, so this is a 2-color option, even though it looks like a 3-color. That's kind of a nice tool to use as a designer, nice process. Okay. They've done a good job here of using color as a background element. They split the page in a way that's not quite in half, which I think is nice. So if you split a page directly in half, it automatically becomes a little bit more staid in a way, a little less dynamic, I should say. So this person didn't do that. They gave a little more space here, not in exactly a 2/3, 1/3, but enough of a difference to make it more dynamic. And then they've taken this type, they've turned this type into outlines, and then just sliced it and slightly offset it, which you can you can use the slice tool in Illustrator very easily. So some of these things you can do the basic your display type in Illustrator and then bring that into InDesign if you'd like. You can find many videos on importing vector illustrations into InDesign or importing images into InDesign on YouTube. Many videos we'll walk you through that, and we can address them in person in questions as well, for any questions as well, or in our Zoom meetings. And then, so they've done that, and they've, you could argue, okay, look at this. You have one size here, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have 5 different sizes, okay? That could get muddy really quickly, but this person used a lot of detail, and they were thinking proportionally, and because they, detailed everything really well, it looks like all those sizes actually gel together and work well. The only thing I don't love these red, for the parentheses and the dividers here. I can see why they might do that. It takes a little bit away from, if those were all white, that could get a little bit muddy perhaps. But I don't know, just the black on red here, I'm not loving that. But overall, very, very nicely done. A similar example to the 2 versions ago we saw with the multiple colors. They've just copied each letter and put them on top of each other, and then played with the same colors, and then just reduced the tints here on these colors to lighten them up, okay, to get that effect. And then this sort of tumbling sort of type acts as sort of foundational anchors for these little blocks of type here, okay. So pretty cool. This one's interesting. I show this one because this was a student who just had some interesting ideas. She did things that were oftentimes like had you scratching your head, but they were always interesting. And here's one I hadn't seen before. You could argue, okay, well, what's the functionality here? This one was definitely more experimental, but I love the way she used color and these funky colors on top of each other. The type is, when you get these justified blocks happening, you can see where you have a little extra space. You could go in here, and any area where you have extra space, all you would do is you would click and select that line and go to your tracking function and add some tracking, so it would actually space the letters out a little bit, but it would also close in those word spaces. That's one way you can work with rivers in a justified situation. Okay. So again, just open this up, click on each, and select the line, click and double click on the line, go to your tracking function and add some tracking. You don't want to do it too much to where the letters look too spaced. You'll know, you just have to eyeball what makes it look consistent, okay? There's the gardener and the leaf blower, so hopefully that's not going to be too distracting. But just an interesting use of color, the way she used this almost, these different shades of similar colors to create this almost movement, sunset, kind of psychedelic-ish, but modern in a way. It's kind of cool. Another more minimal palette. This is a 3-color situation here. Unless, for example, if this paper was this color, sometimes you have different papers you can print on. If this this paper was a kind of tan color, you could then just put black and red. But here they've applied essentially 3 colors, this background, light sort of kind of stone color, tan color, clay-like color, and then the red and black. Just an interesting use of, taking that reverse here and then applying the red to the counter as an accent point, which, that and this little section for Magma Shop for the URL are the only red elements on the page. But that they really add something. This could work as just black on top of this tan as well, but those little tidbits of red really work nicely. So here's getting into some of the experimental ones. And again, what does experimental mean? It's going to be up to you guys in a way. Here they just essentially took the magma type and used it and repeated it and mirrored it and worked with it in a way that created a central element that then the rest of the information was designed around. Okay, nicely done, well crafted, really dynamic layout, very cool. How experimental is that? It's fairly experimental, but not heavy. Same person, so you can see where the iterations matter. So when you have 3 to 5 possibilities for each task, this same person, this was one that they also did, definitely a little more experimental, and both of them are nicely crafted and beautifully laid out though. So then you ask yourself, okay, well, how useful is this information? I mean, all I have now is a blurb and a list, but you can also see that they've used the URL here. They've put the URL in the list. So, one thing I might do is call this out in the heavier weight, similar to this, so I can go right to it. Magmashop.com is really all I need. I know if I look at all these things and I look at this, I know what I'm considering here. And the design is connected to art and design, and so as long as I have something to reference, I'm good. Okay, the repetition of magma here, just piled on top of each other. Nice use of black and white, positive, negative space. Just throwing these things on top. It works fine. It's readable enough. You could say that, oh, well, that gets a little tricky in spots, but I think still very doable and a very dynamic layout. If you're flipping a page, if this isn't an art book or something, you flip it on to this page, you're going to be drawn into it, which is cool. I love this one. Essentially all the information from the blurbs and the logistical stuff and everything just piled on top of each other, thrown up there, and then magmashop.com. Okay, that's all I need something, and that takes me there. So I know that this is typography, this connects me to art and design. Go to magmashop.com, I'll learn more. Okay, so you can see a variety of solutions for the experimental possibilities. Here's another one where they've cut up the name and then just used it as a sort of graphic element as much as a typographic element, and then set up the rest of the information around that. Okay. Also, again, really nicely done, well crafted, the good sizes of everything, scale relationships, the way they've have these connected to the edges of the page where they're bleeding really well without any spunky slivers of space. Nicely done. Okay. Here's one where, okay, you can, this person used some Illustrator tools here, some warping kind of things. That's okay as long as you don't overuse that, because that defeats the whole purpose of you really being the designer and tweaking it yourself. I don't mind this a little bit. This is pretty tastefully done. So when this is distorted the way it is, you'll see here this list is just neutral. Boom, clear and easy. And they've used the space well. So if you're going to use tools like that, use it on one of them. Don't use it on all of your comps. Okay, here and there is fine. Okay, that's getting into images. We'll address that later. Let's talk a little bit about color, adding color to your information. Okay, here's just a little bit of type for Magma, and you can decide how you want to add color. Most of you may know, but now if you in InDesign, if you have a type box selected, you can't just click on it like you can in Illustrator and then add a color to it. Okay, because that's going to color the box. So just know that. All right, what you need to do is if you're going to add color to anything is select it and select whatever. If you want to accent certain things, just do them individually like that. Okay. So that's one thing you have to consider is you got to use if you're going to do different parts of it, you got to select a whole line of type or individual pieces and add your color in your swatches palette. Okay. You can add swatches if you want by clicking on the dialog box and go to New Color Swatch. Process is, spot is like a Pantone color. You're not using that. So process is CMYK. You want to keep it on process. You can do your own custom colors here if you want. Have your color mode in CMYK, not lab or RGB. I mean, we are doing this on screen. If you wanted to use RGB, you can. I just use CMYK because we're going to be typically doing a print thing here. And then you're going to use your sliders to customize. Make sure your black is not on all the way. And you're going to, customize whatever color you want, okay, to do. All right, so that what you do is up to you. And you can have your way to create whatever you want. Another thing you can do is if you want to look at a color book, you can look at some Pantone guides here. And again, Pantone's a color management system. We're not using that for our purposes because we're doing it all on screen. Say I went to solid coded, you could just cruise in here and see a bunch of color options listed. And you can just kind of eyeball something you like and grab it and add it to your swatches. And you'll see because I had something selected, it added that color there. Okay. So just remember, if you have something selected and you add color or you apply a color swatch, it's gonna color whatever you've had selected. I'll change that to black, but you see that color we just added is here. Okay. And another thing here, so I have this set a little bit larger. If we look at some of those examples that we just looked at with the overlapping type used with the transparency, one thing you could do very easily is just click on this. You go to Type, go to Create Outlines, just like Illustrator. Now the trick is, if I've only created one text box for that, I can't use these as separate letters like I can in Illustrator. Okay, this is now outlines, which is great, and I can modify the size, but I can't do it to the individual letters. Okay, so if I want to do that, I have to do individual type boxes here. Okay. Okay, so I have my individual characters here in type boxes, and if I want to make them into outlines and make them a little easier to work with, I would just go to Type, Create Outlines like we did, Shift-Command-0 on a Mac, and then I would get them just sort of loosely organized here. Might be helpful to zoom in, because I'm going to scale these up. I just want to get them to where they're in a sort of central layout here. I would start with these larger in the first place. That would make it a little bit easier. Okay, I'm going to select those and then scale them up. Make sure you hold Shift. Okay, and Shift Command Option is how I learned to do that in InDesign, and that's why they just they scaled up from the center, as you saw that I just did. Because this is the black weight of Helvetica, it has a slightly compressed look to it. Particularly, you can see it on the lowercase g. We didn't smush that, we did that proportionally, but just make sure that you do hold Shift so when you scale up, things aren't stretched out of, all out of whack, okay? So I have my type here. If I think about, the one we looked at with the multiple colors, let's say I'm gonna, select each one of these and just add color to them quickly. And maybe another blue one, and I'll do another yellow one. Okay, this yellow is a little dark, so maybe I'll do the yellow. It's a little bit lighter. Okay, so it looks more like that cyan, magenta, and black, yellow and black. If I overlay the type on top of each other, you can see that it's not showing through, and I'm sure many of you have used blending modes, transparency in Illustrator. It's going to be the same thing in here, and similar to how you'll see things being used in Photoshop. If you want to change the order of things, you can just select each one and just go to Object, Arrange. Say you wanted to bring that one to front, you could do that. Okay, so just go to Object, Arrange, and that'll show you how to move things on top or backwards or to the back, whatever. I use the keyboard shortcuts all the time, which are Shift Command and then the brackets on the keyboard. But for now, Object Arrange will allow you to move them around. Make sure that you have what, if you want one on top of the other, that it's doing that. One thing you're going to notice, like if you're in a view mode, if you are in overprint preview, it's going to show you transparency as it is. So if you are in overprint preview and you don't realize it, and you're trying to not get transparency, it might drive you a little crazy. So just make sure you're not in overprint preview if you don't want it to be showing up as transparency. Okay. If you do want the transparency, you could simply select these and go to your Effects palette, which is under Window, Effects, and you can change your blending modes here to multiply. You can experiment if you want and see how these other ones look as well. It's not going to make a big difference for our purposes because we're working on a white page, but multiply will get you that transparency that you might want. Okay, so that's one way to do that. And again, you can have some of them transparent, some of them not. For this, like the example that we looked at where you get that really interesting sort of translucent look with the multiple colors. If you work with multiply, you're pretty much good. Okay, you could mess with the tint, the opacity of things further to lighten things up if you want. Just be careful. Again, these are screen purposes, so we're fine. When you do that in a print situation, you just got to be careful because the lighter things are, the less fine the line screen is, and you'll see more dots. So you gotta, not if you're printing on an inkjet at home, but for an actual printing job. Okay, so that's the simple way to do it. If you want to add a color that doesn't exist, you can go into your swatches palette and go under New Color Swatch. And Spot is like a Pantone color. You can select Process And then you can use RGB since we're working on screen, but for our purposes, I'm going to use CMYK, and you can make up whatever color you want here, okay? Which is kind of cool, okay? And then what you'll want to do after that is go to, you can just click Add, and that'll do it for you. If you want to add a Pantone color, you can just go to Pantone and then scroll through here and add any color you want. And I'm realizing that I already talked to you about, I had to splice this video, and so we've already talked about this. So there it is again, adding Pantone colors or adding any other swatch you want, okay? I'll add that. That's the same one I picked, so I'll add this one, okay? I'm gonna hit Add, hit Done, and now it's in my swatches, okay? All right, so another thing, let's say you wanted to add a color background. You could very easily do that. All you have to do is use your pen tool and create whatever shape you want, okay? Let's pick a color that's not gonna, it's gonna at least create some difference here. And I'm gonna go, now remember, if you have something sitting on the page already and you create something new, you're going to go on top of that object that already exists, okay? And in this situation, you'll see sometimes when you're creating a shape, it might, if you go to your effects, it's just showing up as multiply. Okay, so that you might be going, why am I seeing that when that's on top? Sometimes when you're creating a shape, depending on your settings, your preferences, it'll automatically go to a multiply setting. Okay, especially if you're drawing over something. Okay, if I don't want that, and I just want a solid color, I can go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back, and have that type on top. Okay, so that's a simple way to do that. You can also, if you wanted to, in your swatches palette, like we just showed, bring down that tint a little bit for a little more contrast between your type and that, okay? And then you can decide, do I want to leave it like that? Maybe you want to take out your pen tool and add another shape here, and we'll just rough this out for now. Let's do this. I'm holding my Shift key when I go to the right angle so I know that it's straight. And nice thing here about the transparency is since I'm drawing over this shape, it makes it so I can still see it, which is a good thing. Okay, and let's say now I can do whatever I want with that, and change that color. Here in this case, I would then say, okay, well, do I want to make this now more similar to the background color, so it looks like it's unified. Okay. And you might even decide, well, you know what? Maybe I want to do this whole thing as one color here. So then I have essentially a two-color solution, which definitely looks a little more unified. Okay. You could even decide, well, let's get rid of this thing and see what happens. Go back to a one-color solution, and it's essentially white with the cyan color. Okay. So a few different ways to work with color. And again, you can play with transparencies and overlays and that kind of thing. And there are endless possibilities, okay? Any questions, let me know. Look forward to seeing your work.